Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Nick and I'm the host, and today I interview John Huber, and John and I talk about his family ministry at his church and some values that they've created. He and his staff have created just recently, actually, and you'll hear as we talk through them. We kind of go through all the values and what they mean and how they use them. And if you listen to the last episode with Lenny Moore, Lenny and I talked a little bit about values as well. Values can be a real helpful tool if you're trying to create a culture that you want, or if you're trying to change the culture, or if you're trying to replicate the culture, because you're going multi-site or there are going to be two services instead of one. Whatever that looks like, values can be a helpful tool in creating the culture you want. So we talked through the values that John and his team created at their church, and it's a great listen. They really do a good job, I think, with some of the language around it. So you'll enjoy that. If you could, before we jump into the interview, I'd love to ask for you to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. That would be really helpful. It helps get the podcast in front of other listeners when they're searching and looking for different things. And so the other thing I would love to ask you about is, I would love some ideas for guests. Who can we have on the podcast as a guest? Who is someone that you would love to ask questions to in ministry to find out what they do or how they do it or whatever it might be? Some people that you listen to, read books, authors. It doesn't, or somebody that's, leading down the street, whoever it might be in children's ministry, in student ministry, or if you're a next gen or a family pastor, who are the people that you would love to hear from? If you could, go ahead and email me those suggestions. My email is nick@nickblevins.com. We'll have that in the show notes as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on who we could have on the podcast, because I'm always looking for guests and always looking for great questions we can ask and things we can learn. So I appreciate you helping me out there. But let's go ahead and jump into my interview with John as he talks about the family ministry values they've recently created and how they use them. Today I'm joined by John Huber. Welcome, John.
Good to be with you, Nick.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, for anyone that doesn't know you, yourself, your family, your church.
Sure. Well, I'm at Westside Family Church in Kansas City, and I'm part of our executive team, and I sit as the family pastor, next-gen pastor. I've been here in Kansas for 9 years, and before coming out here, I was at a church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 10 years, started out in youth ministry. I know, Nick, it's probably a little hard for us to be having this conversation considering I'm a Steeler fan and you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, but you know what? I'm going to let that slide, and we're going to have a good time today.
I consider it me just using the grace that God wants me to use with other people. You know what I mean? Like, I just let that be the core of our relationship, and then we're okay. It gets tested during certain games or times of the season. You know what I mean? But that's what I view it as, just a test. Of
there you go. All right.
Where were you? What church were you in Pittsburgh, by the way?
It was Northway Christian Community Church.
Okay.
It's located just outside of Pittsburgh.
Cool that you were there for 10 years. As much as there's a huge rival there in the football world, the funny thing is, I don't know if you'd agree, I feel like the towns are so similar. There's
very similar.
And I think church that way too, because I know some other folks who are in churches there, and it's just great to talk because there's so many similarities in the culture. It's pretty cool that you were there for 10 years, and now you're at Westside. And you said you led student ministry at the previous church?
I started out in middle school ministry. Did that for 3 years, then became our student pastor. And my last 5 years, I became the family pastor.
Okay, and then that's the same role you have at Westside. So you did that before. Yep. Okay, cool. One of the things we want to talk about today, and I think everybody, regardless of whether they lead in children's ministry or student ministry or next gen like you, we're going to talk about values and culture and like how they relate and how you're using that. Because I know that's something I always love to hear is, how is that actually working or being used in a church? So for you, because this isn't something you've had necessarily day one at Westside, why did you create a list of values?
Yeah, Nick, it's a great question. And let me just touch on an area of interest and growth for me as a leader. One of the things that I had discovered in my early years of ministry was this idea of leadership and really what that looked like in the life of the church, and particularly in the life of family ministry. And So, one of the things that I did is I went back to school, got a master's in organizational leadership, and everything I wrote about and learned about was applied to the church. And so one of the things that we and I have discovered along this journey is how important it is to have things like guiding leadership values that you can have for your staff, but also with your volunteers, because, the bigger you are, the more you have to be strategic in terms of how you lead your volunteers, how you lead your staff. But here's the truth about leadership and these values. It works at any size of a church. And whether you have a staff of 30 or a staff of 2, and vice, same with the volunteers. So, we really, try to look at leadership, and that first core value is about leadership.
So before I want to jump into that too, so you can explain,
Sure.
How leadership's a value and how it all works. So we're going to walk through them. So for people listening, they'll get to hear them, and we'll probably post the list as well on the show notes
Sure.
or whatever. But how does it relate to culture for you? How do values and having that relate to culture and maybe the culture that you want as a church or as a family ministry?
Sure. Yeah, I think culture, is it's one of those things that's defined by what's important, and it's shaped by what's important. And when you value something, you spend time on it, you spend energy on it, and it really becomes a part of who you are, and it becomes a part of your ethos, and it really helps you stay on target. It helps you to stay focused. It helps you to be intentional. And so I think when you look at a staff culture and a volunteer culture, having guiding values that either realign you or refocus you is always helpful.
I'm throwing a curveball here because we didn't talk about this question, but how long, well, you did tell me, but how long have you had these list of values kind of in place or, since you created them? How long has it been?
Sure. So every good idea is stolen from somebody else.
Of course,
so
yeah.
We know that is true. There's nothing really new under the sun. And this past fall, I got to hang out with a phenomenal leader. And we started talking about values, and he shared some of his. And so this is probably about 4 months now. We've been working, and I've been working on this with my entire directional team. I've got 7 people that sit on that team on family ministry, and we've been flushing this out to really help put some real tangible, applicable things to creating these values.
So this is real new. Has there been any, 4 months in, it could be easy to see where maybe nothing has changed yet just because it's so new. But have you seen any change so far?
Absolutely. Yeah. And particularly in our staff, because we've been introducing this idea to them, and they, as we unpack these, you'll see why it's very exciting for them, because it's encouraging, it's inspiring. It really challenges them. There's accountability to these values. There's really gives some clear direction, who we are, who we're not. It focuses on team. It focuses on effort, work ethic. That's a big thing. People in the church sometimes, I hear, well, how do you hold people accountable? Well, there are ways to do that. And if we're consistently doing it within the whole organization, I think it's healthier. And it also creates, part of that culture of working hard and playing hard.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into them now. And I know some people are going to want to know, how do you actually use these? How do you teach them? How do people get them? And we'll hit that at the end. So they have to stick around, listen to them, and then we'll hit that at the end. But you mentioned one of the first ones. The first one is leadership. So how do you define that, and what does that look like?
Sure. We choose to love first and lead second, but always do both. And so how we live that out is we love our staff, and we love our volunteers, and that's important. And part of what we do is we challenge every one of our staff. You need to know at least 10 people personally, and your ministry is only going to be as big as your volunteer base is. So at every level, the next level down from our staff is our coach, and so we have about 10 coaches that they have about 10 people, and so. We're always talking about this idea of loving people, loving them where they are, and loving them requires you to know who they are. And so you have to spend time with them. Every year we put money in our budget, and I think the best money spent is going to be on your volunteers. So whether that's taking them to coffee, lunch, whatever that looks like, you need to start first building that relationship, spending time with them outside of Sunday morning. And we do these things called leadership connection. And you can't connect with the leader on Sunday because saying hi to them in the hallway or in the classroom is that anyone can do that.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
Right, it doesn't count. So we say, hey, get out and go have a meal. Invite them over to your house for dinner, whatever that looks like. So it always starts with the love part starts with caring for them as individuals, knowing who they are, being a part of their lives. And then being available in times of crisis or in times of need is important. And so that's one of the ways that we do that. And I'm very intentional with my staff. I have, like I said, I've got 7 directional leaders that I'm very well connected with. They know my family. I know their family. I know what their prayer requests are. I know what their needs are. I recently had one of my staff that I could tell she needed time off. She was kind of at the end of her rope, if you will, and I just encouraged her. I sat down with her and I said, "Hey, I love you more than I love you in this position, and because of that, I'd love for you to take the next 30 days off, and we're going to pay you because I want you to be healthy." And so that's a way to love people. Our leaders, when it comes to volunteers, sat down with a volunteer yesterday, and this is the part. This is the leading part. We had to ask a leader to step down because she had too much going on in her personal life, and she wasn't really present in her ministry life. And so the way we love and lead is they kind of go hand in hand because we have to do both. When you love people and you're leading them through ministry, you've got to know who they are, know what they're struggling with. And then the leadership part is, what do you do about that? How do you care for them? What tough questions do you ask? And so those are some of the ways that we do that as well.
We're having some conversations now about really emphasizing, in the same way you're saying love, and I like how you phrase that. We choose to love first and lead second. We're talking about the servant part of leadership and the fact that that's the dominant thing in the Bible, more than leadership. And that if you were looking for those two phrases, you're going to find servant a lot more. Has this, maybe this has always been in your culture, but has this as part of love and putting that first and leadership second, is that newer? And are people wrestling with it, both staff and volunteers? And you know what I mean? Because I could see for us, as we begin to talk about it more, some of it's just language. Like we need to talk about it more, about being a servant. But some of it's in practice too. We want it to look like you're describing. Has that always been there, or has this new value list and this one in particular helped you love more?
I would say over the last 5 years, this is an area that have focused on personally as a leader, but also with my team, and have learned that you can lead people different ways. And there's a book when I first started ministry called Good to Great, and gave me a lot of ideas about the bus and the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. And, but even, as you learn how to do that, you've got to do it in a loving way, because at the end of the day, what matters most is relationships and God, and those two things are tied together. So I would say over the last 5 years, we really, if you sat down with our directional team and asked them about this, they would say that this is important. And now it's important. Is it always easy to live it out? No, because sometimes people don't fully understand or they don't get it. And so there are moments, that you have to be a little more direct and a little more certain, a little clearer. And so I think that happens depending on, the staff or the volunteer.
Yeah, that's good. I just know sometimes those can feel like a tension, and it's easier sometimes to lead, without loving almost, or forget that part. And so that's why I like that you've made it practical in the sense that those 7 people, those are the team. That's the team that you focus on the most. They have 10 coaches who have 10 leaders, however it works. That way it's manageable, as opposed to one of your staff leading 50 people, and now they have to love first and lead second 50 people, which, pretty much no one can do very well.
Well,
so that's good.
Yeah. And that's where your default will go in. If you don't create those layers, if we didn't have those layers of our staff to our coaching, to our small group leaders, to our leaders, there is no way we would be able to care for them because we would just be in leading mode. You know what I mean? And so this allows us to focus. Hey, our job is to create vision, strategy, and care for you. And then it's really the coaches, the small group leaders, and then our volunteer leaders to live that out. And so it is important. The other thing that we do, Nick, is we create ministry goals. Every staff member on family ministry team and our coaches, they create their ministry goals in December every year, and then we review them in July. Okay, 1st of July. And so what that is this is the part of the leading and the loving part. When I meet with my directional leaders in December, I tell them, okay, I would like you to come to our meeting, our one-on-one meeting, and I want you to bring 3 personal goals and 3 ministry goals that you're going to work on this year. And then me as their leader, I bring to the table 3 ministry goals. Personal goals are pretty personal. So, so I bring 3 ministry goals, things that I've observed, and say, hey, here are 3 things that I would like you to focus on as it relates to if they oversee grade school ministry, early childhood ministry, or our student ministry.
Now, so in the end, do they have 6? They're 3 plus you're 3, or do you discuss it out and land on 4, or how does that work?
Yeah. So what we do is, we have that conversation and we land on 4. Okay. So basically, they get 2 and I get 2.
Gotcha. Yeah. So everybody's got to cut one. Well, sometimes they're probably the same anyway. You come.
And honestly, Nick, most of the time they are.
Yeah, that's just probably indicative of being on the same page or whatever. See it the same way. So
absolutely.
That's good. So the next one you have is risk, which I love because I love risk. So, but tell me how you define that and what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah, risk is one of those things where, we have a big God, so we take big risks and we trust Him with big results. I'm one of those guys where I hate saying it, but most of the time I'm just not settled. There's something, I walk into a room and I try to look through the eyes of, okay, is there anything that we could do different? Is there anything we could do better? And so, by taking risk, we're not going to play it safe, because I think there's a lot at stake. And when we unpack this with our leaders, with my directional team and our staff, they got really, really excited because risk means that it's going to cost you something. There could be a cost here. And so it may be energy, time, but there's also a reward with risk, and so we always look at it and we say, okay, we want to reach a lot of people for Christ. There are thousands and thousands of unreached families within a 20-mile radius of our church. And so, we just want to make sure that we cast vision to all of our staff and volunteers, and they understand, hey, there's a lot at stake here, and we're going to always create new action plans and steps for our programs, service projects, focus groups, whatever they may be. We're constantly looking and saying, okay, God, you're big, and we want to make sure that we're just not playing it safe, And so, and I think of Scripture in terms of recently, we had a 4-month-old who had a head injury, and the doctors were not optimistic at all. But our family staff rallied around this family, and we prayed 24/7. And Nick, I still believe our God does big miracles, and this boy is now home with his family, and so there, we have a big God, and we can't lose sight of that. He wants to do amazing things in the lives of all of His people, and the people who are not yet part of the church.
Do you have? Was there anybody on your team that's risk averse? Just because that's some of it's just a personality thing. I like risk more. My wife does not. So did you have anybody on your team that this was harder? Because it was what, I really like when things are known and there's not failure. You know what I mean? And has this been hard for them?
Yeah, we call those control freaks. I'm just kidding.
I could be both though. Somehow I'm both. So how do you I don't know how
weird.
that works.
I am too. Yeah. No, that's a great question, Nick. And truthfully, there are. We have a couple of our leaders who they're just not wired that way. But here's the deal. When you cast vision that's exciting, that's compelling, that's way beyond them, because really that's what we do. At the end of the day, we come and we're part of church leadership, but our goal is to share the gospel and build relationships. And so when we cast vision to our team and our directional team and our volunteers and our leaders, we say, hey, listen, guys, there should be things that keep you up at night, and so you need to figure out what that risk looks like for you. The things that I always say the things that keep you up at night, or your greatest need is the thing that you need to be paying the most attention to during that week. And if it's hard for you to risk, then we always, the way I help people unpack this is through action plans and action steps. And so I say, okay, I want you to write down, what are 4 things if you need to, let's say, increase your volunteers and you're having a hard time doing it. Well, you have to identify, what's holding you back from doing it? And then what are you going to do about it? What action plan are you going to put in motion that will help you recruit more volunteers or, whatever the need may be? And so it's really, risk, has different parts to it.
Yeah, with an action plan, you can actually make it practical, and you could probably push them a little bit. Like, here's what I'm saying I'm going to do, and you can speak into that and say, you know what, actually, what if you tried this? And it's a little bit riskier, and for someone who's not inclined that way, they can get pushed a little bit and then try it. That's good.
Yep.
That's good. You said another one is effort, and you talked a little bit about that, we were talking earlier.
Yep.
So how do you discuss effort? How do you talk about it, and how do you help people live it out?
Yeah. So we work hard, we give our best, and put our family first. So that's what follows that word. And what we mean by that is when we are here, we're present. I talk about this in the family context. I love to work hard, get in the office and really begin to kind of look at the week and what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Because I want to give my best. I want to honor God with what He's called me to do. And we have that same expectation on our directional team, to our staff, and also to volunteers. We want your best effort when you're here. And so we look at it in 3 areas. When we're building relationships with our staff and our volunteers, we think, in your life, you've got there's the spiritual side of who you are. There's the emotional side of who you are. And then there's the physical side of who you are, your health and how you care. And one of the things that we say is we ask those questions. When we meet with a leader or a volunteer, we say, how are you doing spiritually? And how can I pray for you? And so, and then same with the emotional side, and then the physical side. And so, the effort is, and then you have to identify on your team, because not everybody likes to work hard. Not everybody puts in, and so you have to, when you have those kind of people, you've got to ask a question that I'll ask my team, is what is the issue behind the issue? So is there something going on that we don't know about? Because I think that's the thing that holds people back sometimes from whatever, performing, working hard, or accomplishing what they need to accomplish.
Yeah, and even the 3 areas you talked about, that made something like you're saying, the issue behind the issue is probably in one of those 3. Yeah. If that gets fixed, then effort can maybe be where it needs to be, which is, that's a big thing. I love just like this one and like the example of leadership. I love how you define it, but you still make sure priorities are right. So love first, lead second. We work hard, give our best, but put family first. That's really good. Yeah. This next one. Go ahead.
I was just going to touch on that last one because that one's important. More is caught than taught. And that really is true in your family. And so one of the things, that effort piece, for me, when I leave my office and I get home, I'm present with my kids and my wife. And I really, I I have learned probably about 6-7 years ago. I stopped bringing my laptop home. And as soon as I get home, I put my phone and I plug it in. And, I had a time in a season where I would get up from the dinner table when my phone rang and I would take a call, whether it was a hospital visit or, a family in need. And I've just gotten to a point where that effort, it starts in my family. It starts at home.
That's good. That's a good way to put it. It's effort in both places. And I like, having it there just reminds people of what matters most. And if you didn't have it, it could almost seem like you're pushing people to not put their family first. Like, hey, You're not giving the effort here. The next one you have is team. And of course, all of these are related, but I could totally see the connection here between these two. But how do you define that, and why does that even make it in the value list almost? It could almost be one of those ones. It's like, well, yeah, we're a team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Team, we say, we want to take the hill and we want to take it together. And this is very important because you can build a team, but a team can break down just as quickly as you built it. And what I mean by that is, it requires teamwork, which requires the right people. It requires unity. Unity is, I think of, John 10:10, and the scripture says that Satan came to rob, kill, and destroy. So if you ever wanted to know what Satan's plan was for you as a leader, for your family, for your ministry, is to rob, kill, and destroy you. The second part of that passage is what's lived out. But Jesus came to give you life and life abundantly. Okay, and so that's his promise to us, that death has been defeated. But unity is so important, and that's why it's important to keep it within your team. The attitude, and attitude is it's from the top down. So how we lead as leaders, and then how we lead our staff, and then how we lead our volunteers is very important. And one of the things that is applied in all of family ministry, and actually in all of our church, is the Matthew 18 principle. So nobody is ever, now I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but nobody is ever allowed to talk bad about somebody else. And if it happens, we say, hey, have you gone to that person? You need to have that conversation, because team members, if we're working together and we have the unity, we're going to go and approach that conflict or that issue with that person directly.
That's good. And these are some practical ways that you make team of value, because it's easy to say teams of value and then not do it. You know what I mean? Like, it takes hard work and instance like that where conflict comes up and, now you have to go to the person or whatever. Yeah. That's good.
And what's true about this one, Nick, is we have almost 600 volunteers in our family ministry, but the same principle applies to 5 volunteers. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. And yeah. So, you want to be unified no matter what the size is. It's probably harder the bigger you get in some ways.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But the truth is we hold this as a high value because teamwork is so important. And
you mentioned attitude, and I love the definition you have, because that's the next one. It's one of the values you have. So tell us the definition of that one. I just think and you kind of spoke to it in the example there, but
yeah. No, this is a great one. And this one is probably the one my entire directional team, like I could see them all perk up when I read this for the first time to them, because they knew, wow, there's accountability to this. So attitude, we live on the solution side of every issue. And so when I said that, I said that for the first time, I remember the staff looking at me and I said, you know what that means, right? That means we don't complain about anything, because scripture says that complaining is wrong. And so we live on the side of solution. And I recently had a volunteer who had an issue with our student pastor, but he didn't go to the student pastor. So sent me an email, and I sent him an email back and said, hey, you're going to have to connect with our student pastor before I have any meeting with you. Because this is, we go back to the unity piece. And so he went to that, and the conversation went okay, but he still, about a month later, he ended up sending me another email and said, hey, I'd really like to meet with you, student pastor, and a couple other student leaders. So, I said, okay, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to come to our meeting on the solution side of this. So I would like you, I understand these are your 3 issues and 3 concerns, but I would like you to come with 4 to 5. How and what would you do to solve this, to create a new solution? And so the meeting went really good because he got there and he was prepared. And so we sat down and we flushed it all out. We actually took 2 of his ideas that he came with, we implemented. And so I think it's important to remember no problem is too big for God. We don't complain about problems. We keep unified because it's worth fighting for. And then attitude, teamwork. We want the team to win as a whole.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know if this value is in place in that example you gave, but he could have spent his time on the other side of the issue, right? Complaining or just being upset or whatever it is. And instead, you helped him focus on solutions, and he came out with some options and 2 good ones, and that's a good example. I love that. I just think that's a really good way to phrase it. We live on the solution side, like just the idea that there are 2 sides, and we get to choose how we're going to think about it. Because sometimes it's so bad the solution you don't even know what the solution is, but you can still choose an attitude that's positive as opposed to blaming people or whatever.
Well, and here's what we have to remember as leaders, Nick. I remember in my early years, like I thought I knew everything, and so, the longer I do this, the more I realize how much I don't know. And so the attitude part is it also, for me as a leader, for our staff, it puts us in a position that we're listening. And so when you're able to listen to your volunteers, your coaches, and you're able to take input and feedback, it then also creates this idea of trust. And so they're going to lean more into leading your ministry more. And so that's where I think the attitude piece is lived out and played out. And for younger leaders, I would encourage all of you to learn how to do this quickly. Learn how to be in a posture that simply says, hey, we want your feedback. Now, listen, that doesn't mean we change everything that you're going to give feedback on,
Sure.
But it does say that, hey, we're open enough to take feedback. And that, I think, is highly important for any leader.
Now, this next one is to be sober. Okay, not really, but to be sober-minded. I don't know about you. When I read the list, I was like, okay, never mind, sober-minded. Not quite just being sober. So how'd you pick that one? How do you define it? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the sober-minded, we know who we are and who we are not, and we do what is best for the whole. So here's the idea of this, is all of us, whether it's early childhood, whether it's grade school, whether it's student ministry, we all bring certain gifts, certain passion, and certain leadership abilities to what we lead. And so I think it's always important to really know who you are and know what gifts that you have, and then take those gifts and share them with the whole. So, one of the things that I come across often when I consult with churches about family ministry is I always hear this idea that we're in silos. We don't work together. And part of it is, if you look at the early childhood, they have no idea what's going on in student ministry, or student ministry has no idea what's going on in grade school. And so the one thing that you want to do, and this goes to unity and teamwork, is bring those people together and know who you are, and then know who you're not. Knowing who you're not also saves a lot of headache too, because it's going to keep you focused in the gift sets that you have, the abilities that you have, when it comes to program, when it comes to training, all those different things. And so we make sure that we're okay with, I'm okay with my staff saying, I don't know how to do that. And so when it starts there, we're able to go, okay, well, at least you're not going to try to fake it till you make it. we're going to help you. And it's part of the training process too. When we know who we are and we know who we're not, it helps on the training side of things.
Yeah. In some cases they can learn it, get trained in it, which is great. In other cases, it goes back to team. You could be more of a team because somebody else can do that, or you need to find somebody else that can do that, that you can't do. Yeah. That's, they are what you're not or whatever. And so you get them to help there. That's good. This next one's probably my favorite one, but that's just because, in some ways I feel like it should define our churches. Most churches probably can't say this defines them, but if they could make a huge difference in the kingdom. And you use the word outsiders. Tell me about that one and, how you live that out.
Yeah, this value, outsiders, we exist for those who are not yet here. And last month when we were in Atlanta, Nick, you were there with me. Reggie said something that I wrote in my notes and probably tweeted about, but this idea that we have to focus on the people we want to reach and not the people we want to keep.
Yeah. Now,
some people could take that the wrong way, but I look at this value as outsiders. And if you look at the life of Christ, that's what he came to seek and save that which was lost. And so what we talk about in our team, our directional team, we just talked about this past week, is the outsider. We want to spend just as much energy, time, and resource on reaching the outsider as we do with the 1,500 kids and students that come through our doors on Sunday. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, because most churches not anywhere near that. It's whatever 90-95% on the insider, and it's good stuff. Usually it's good stuff. Usually we're talking about discipleship or something like that. But the balance is off. It's 95% discipleship and 5% evangelism. Maybe it's like an event or some kind of tactic or something. Yeah, it's just missing. And I think and your church is probably an example of this. The best churches, it seems like this is core to who they are. Is a big part. It's not it's not programmatic. Like we do 50% of our programming is reaching outsiders. It's kind of like what the existing programs look like or how you talk about them and all that stuff, which is good.
Yeah. And don't assume that, remember too, the outsider is also an insider. That outsider that, I just talked with our student staff last week. I actually spoke in our high school last Wednesday night, and I noticed a lot of unchurched kids in the room. And, I know who they are because they got that look and they're kind of on the fringe outside and they barely want to come in. And so I started talking with our staff saying, hey, listen, guys, we've got a great core group of young leaders, but you're responsible for those kids that are standing on the fringe as well. You've got to care for them. You've got to identify them. You've got to make sure that they feel welcome, get to know them, and so that's the part of, that outsider is also an insider. If they come into your church, which is our plan, then make sure that you know how to identify them, care for them, and really help them see that we're here to build relationships and share the gospel. And so the other thing that strikes me with this one, Mark Batterson wrote a book recently called If, and he talks about this idea that one day we are going to stand before the throne of heaven, and we're going to have to give an account for all the things that we did do and all the things that we didn't do. And it really hit me as I started thinking about the things that I didn't do. And think about it this way. Think about those conversations that the Spirit of God nudged you to have with somebody, maybe just across the room or at the gym or at the grocery store, whatever it was, and you walked away from that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think, my directional team, they love this idea outsider because they started thinking about their own neighborhood and, the places where their schools, where their kids go. And so this one helps us to always keep in front of us that, hey, someday we're going to give an account.
Yeah. And I think some of the best churches I've seen that do this well, it is like you're talking about. They're thinking about it personally in their own neighborhood or their own circles of influence or whatever first, and then carrying that over to church and what it looks like there, which is good. because sometimes you want like the what's the strategy or the tactic or the event or the program, and I just what I've observed is really that's not it. It is more of a culture thing, so that's good that you all have it as part of your values. Now the last one you have is model, so describe that one for us.
Yeah, and people might ask, why would you put this one last? And I'll tell you in a second. But this one is model. Follow me as I follow Jesus. And here's why this one's last. You can't do any of those other things until you do this one. So the idea of follow me as I follow Jesus, God is going to give us direction on leadership, on risk, on effort, on team, on attitude, on being sober-minded, on reaching the outsiders. And so, I saved this for last because this is very personal. And this really, I think, is directed to every leader as an individual. And one of the things that I really am a firm believer is that you can't give what you don't have. And so what I mean by that is it's, nobody else is going to make you do grow in your faith or take care of your body or take care of your mind. Now they can pray for you, they can encourage you, and that's what we're called to do for all of our leaders. But I think the more that we follow and understand the way Jesus did ministry, his purpose here on earth when he was here, I think that gets then played out in how we lead our ministries. And, and we can't, another thing that I firmly believe is that you can't ask somebody to do something that you're not willing to do yourself.
Yeah, both in terms of maybe sometimes you might think of that in terms of like a volunteer role or something like that, but also in following Jesus and discipleship and growing your faith and all that stuff, which is really good. That's awesome. So that's the list right there, and you kind of recapped them too. But how do you practically, I know it's early because you've only had these going for like 4 months or so, but how are you starting to get these in your staff and in your volunteers? Because I know one of the questions I hear all the time when it comes to list of values is like, yeah, but is anybody going to remember them all? Like, even if you can get your staff to remember them, like, or volunteers going to remember them. So how are you doing that? How are you getting it in people?
Yeah. So here's what we've started. So every other week I meet with my directional leadership team, and we take one of these core values. Actually, we've gone through them, but we are taking them and we're building on them over the last 4 months. And then one of the things that we also have done is we've put this in our leader training manual. So every new leader that comes in to our ministry is going through these values. And then a month ago, we had a quarterly training. And so we had all of our middle school leaders, high school leaders together, all of our grade school leaders, all of our early childhood leaders together. And we're beginning to share these values with them. And so, and then we're also trying to get creative with, because not everybody can make the meetings. So we're trying to create video links where they can go. And we just talk about the value for 5 minutes. And we say, hey, here's what's coming over this next month. We're going to focus on teamwork. And here's what this looks like. Or, hey, we just want to remind us all that we live, on the side of risk. We serve a big God. We want to take big risk and we want to trust him with big results. Here's how we're doing that. This month, we're going to serve and here, there, wherever it may be. So we're still kind of flushing out what that looks like, but we have it, slated in all of our trainings. When we gather our leaders, these values will be integrated into that time together.
That's good. And like you're doing with the videos and stuff like that, just talking about them all the time is probably that's probably the thing. You just have to talk about them all the time. Yeah. Like you'll never stop talking about them. Yep. Whatever. Do you have volunteer huddles? Do you do them there? I was at a church one time that did like once a month. They would talk about, I guess they had 12 or something. So it was a lot of values, but every month they talked about one, which I thought was a good way to,
sure, share
it or whatever.
Yeah, we have gatherings, all the time with our leaders. So what we're trying to do is, we're on the early side of adopting this, is that it's got to get fully invested into our staff and our directional leaders, and that's happening. And then I think this is going to bleed out into our volunteer teams and really just move from a value maybe to be part of the culture. Of saying, hey, here's what we're about. Here are the things that are going to guide us Here are the things that are going to keep us focused. Here are the things that are going to realign us. So I think these things are pretty good.
Yeah, this is really helpful, and I hope we'll post them in the show notes so people can download them there if they didn't, take notes while we were talking there. How can people connect with you if they have any questions or want to follow up?
Sure. They can connect with me on Twitter, Facebook, at westsidefamilychurch.com. My email is jhuber@westsidefamilychurch.com, and I tell people all the time, I'll send you anything that I have as long as you'll give me whatever you have.
Yep, that's how it should be. That's good. Awesome, John. Well, this has been really helpful. Thanks for taking the time and walking through this with us and for sharing this.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Take care.
I tell you what, I'm learning to appreciate the importance of values more and more. And our church, for example, didn't have a list of values that we really used in the beginning. And over time, we've created a list of staff values, and we're in the process right now of creating a list of values for the whole church. Something that, if you read it, would accurately describe what it looks like, how we operate, how we do things here. I've heard people talk about culture and values as how we do things here. So I loved hearing the ones that John had there and his team. They just did a great job crafting those. I love the way they said some of those things. That was important. The action items, suggestions that I have are really the same exact ones as the last episode with Lenny. And that's to create a list of values. If you don't have that, maybe you create that. Or maybe you do have a list of values and you realize, you know what? These aren't very helpful. We did that in our children's ministry years ago. We have a list of children's ministry values that are not terrible, but they're not very good. And we just don't use them. They're not practical. So, you might need to overhaul yours. One thing I would suggest is the book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. Great book. And in there, he talks about how you don't want to use values that are like permission to play. Like you shouldn't even be able to do what you do if you don't value that already. In other words, it doesn't have to make it on a list of values. So in the church world, that might be prayer, the Bible. These are important things, of course, but they should be a given. They should be assumptions. The values that we create should be more unique, define us maybe in a way that separates us from other churches, not in a bad way because we're on the same team, but what really makes your church or your ministry unique. So you can create that list of values, and then again, you want to create a plan to share them regularly. You have to have a way to keep getting them in front of people, talking about them. Otherwise, people are going to forget. So those are the two things that I would do coming out of this interview. As usual, you can get all the show notes. You can get John's list of values in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 44. In the next episode, I talk with Corinne Noble, and we talk about worship for kids. What can worship look like for children's ministry? And they do something a little bit unique in terms of how they lead worship for kids on during their services on weekends. And she shares something that they're doing that I've never heard of before. And I've heard of it in other ministries or with other age groups, but I've never heard of a church doing this with children's ministry as it relates to worship music. So you don't want to miss that. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.